The topic of this debate is, when in conflict, combating poverty is more important than combating climate change. This is a complex and nuanced issue that has been widely debated in recent years. In this speech, I will define some terms, provide a criterion for evaluating the relative importance of these two issues, and then explore the main arguments for and against the idea that combating poverty should take precedence over combating climate change. First, it is important to define the terms being discussed. Combating poverty refers to government policies aimed at reducing and eliminating poverty, including the provision of basic necessities such as food, housing, and healthcare, as well as the creation of economic opportunities and the promotion of social and political inclusion. Combating climate change refers to government policies aimed at reducing and mitigating the effects of human-induced climate change, including the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, the promotion of renewable energy, and the adaptation to the impacts of climate change. The term when in conflict means that we are going to focus on when there is a forced choice between government funding each policy. Our argument is going to be that poverty reduction policies should be funded at higher levels than policies that reduce climate change. In evaluating whether combating poverty is more important than combating climate change, the criterion I propose is to consider the relative urgency and immediacy of the two issues. I will argue that poverty is an immediate and urgent problem that affects the lives of millions of people around the world, whereas my opponent can argue that fighting climate change requires urgent action to avoid long-term irreparable problems. First, poverty is an immediate and urgent problem that affects the lives of millions of people around the world, whereas climate change is a long-term problem that may not have significant impacts for decades or even centuries. This argument is supported by a study published in the Journal of International Development in 1995, which found that poverty is a primary driver of vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. In other words, people living in poverty are more likely to be affected by climate change because they lack the resources and infrastructure to cope with the impacts. Therefore, the argument goes, addressing poverty is an essential step in addressing climate change. Second, government spending on combating climate change slows poverty reduction efforts. Governments are bound to manage finite resources and must make choices on how to spend capital. Björn Lomborg, a visiting professor at the Copenhagen Business School, is director of the Copenhagen Consensus Center, wrote in Project Syndicate, September 26, 2019, that the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement is the most expensive international accord in history because it aims to wean entire economies off fossil fuels. The money that must be pledged to meet the requirements of the agreement have an inherent trade-off with poverty reduction plans. One startling example is Germany. The German government plans to spend $44 billion over 4 years to help the country cut its carbon dioxide emissions. Such measures will likely reduce the global rise in temperature by 0.00018 degrees Celsius in 100 years, an immeasurably small gain for such a huge cost. By contrast, spending the same amount on preventing tuberculosis in developing countries could save more than 10 million lives. Overall, the Journal of World Development, October 2019, estimates that the cost of combating climate change is a 4% increase in poverty over a decade. Third, targeting poverty reduction can actually be a catalyst for combating climate change. Poverty reduction strategies can have multiple benefits, including not only improving the lives of people living in poverty but also reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing resilience to climate change. This argument is supported by a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which found that policies that promote sustainable and equitable economic growth can help to reduce poverty, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and increase resilience to climate change. There are two specific examples where poverty reduction policies result in environmentally friendlier lifestyles. Poverty reduction can help to reduce deforestation, which is a significant source of carbon emissions. People living in poverty often rely on forest resources for livelihoods and subsistence, but may lack the resources to manage them sustainably. By improving economic opportunities and providing alternative livelihoods, poverty reduction can help to reduce the pressure on forests and reduce emissions. Additionally, poverty reduction can help to improve food security and reduce the need to convert natural habitats into cropland or grazing land, which contributes to both deforestation and emissions. Addressing poverty can also help to improve access to education, healthcare, and other social services, which can contribute to a more resilient society that is better able to adapt to the effects of climate change. Overall, poverty reduction is a more urgent issue to address than climate change. More resources ought to be directed to fighting poverty than mitigating climate change. If policies begin to prioritize combating climate change, poverty reduction efforts are slowed, and we fail as a society to address the more urgent of these two problems. And, by addressing poverty, we can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, conserve natural habitats and biodiversity, and build more resilient communities that are better able to adapt to the effects of climate change.